For live. All right. Welcome to the latest Straight Up Hangout. Today's topic is what is a model, entry model, asset model, user model. We'll look at what comes our way and we'll try to understand them better. Today we have with us Brad Bell from Pixel and Tonic and Matt Stein, the man behind Working Concept. My name is Ben Prusik from Barrel Strength Design, and let's get started. All right. What is a model? We hear this word come up a lot in our craft development, and we hear it plenty of other places out on the web too. Yi uses a model view controller structure. Browsers have a document object model. We're seeing this word everywhere, but does it mean the same thing in every context? No. And what does it mean in the contexts we're using it in? So I was going to start where we frequently start, in the craft docs. If we're developing a website and in our templates we might be referring to the docs, and the docs start us out in our templating reference, and they share with us a handful of models, but they give them the label of variables in the sidebar here, and they tell us whenever you're dealing with an entry in your template, you're actually working with an entry model. Well, that's helpful. We can kind of see that entry's model has something related to entry data, but doesn't give us the best answer. If we get into the plugin docs, we see there's a little more lip service given to models. Here, models are defined as containers for data, and information passed between service and controllers and templates in craft is passed via model. So that's nice. That gives us a little more information. That's more on the programming side of things, of how they're being handled in the back end. And so what happens? We might wonder, okay, we're interacting with these models all the time. I'll Google model, and that doesn't result well, because you get 1,000 things back, and nothing relates to the problem at hand. And searching what is a model programming even comes up with quite a wide variety of results. So what type of model are we working with? How do we start learning more about this? Well, if we start adding words to our Google search, we start getting a little more information. We can search for data model. Data model says it organizes data elements and standardizes how data elements relate to one another. It's the Wikipedia description. We can search for objects. Objects tell us, again, Wikipedia, object computer science tells us, in a class-based object-oriented programming paradigm, object refers to a particular instance of a class where object can be a combination of variables, functions, and data structure. Okay, that sounds interesting. And we can keep going. We can keep searching for similar words and words they give us. We see several other definitions out there. One I liked by somebody who is said to be the founder of the MVC framework, Trig Reenskog. Anybody else know how to pronounce that? All right, I'm going to go with that for now. Says, models represent knowledge. A model could be a single object, or it could be a structure of objects. There should be a one-to-one correspondence between the model and its parts, and the represented world as perceived by the owner of the model on the other hand. The classes which are used to store and manipulate state, typically in a database of some kind, is another definition I ran into out there. All right, Matt, Brad, what is a model?
Well, I think you've covered it clearly. I like to think of them as just nice and encapsulated ways of transporting data between the various layers of craft, like through templating and through controllers and services and all that. That's the programmer in me.
I come in as a person with a design background, trying to understand what the benefit of understanding these things are. My understanding is much simpler. So for me, models are nouns. If we're making a website, and a website is a sentence, the models are the nouns, or the things that are concrete, stored bits of stuff, as opposed to the verbs or the, maybe conjunctions, or we get into weird territory. But the models are kind of like the nouns of the grand sentence that is the site.
Great. And the thing, another thing about these models is they generally don't change throughout the site in the way that we're interacting with them. When we interact with an entry model, whether we're interacting with an entry model itself or via a relations field or via programming on the back end, the model always represents the same pairing of data or the same group of data. And this might be limiting, but is it fair to say models contain a combination of variables and functions?
Sure, they can. Sure. Ideally, you don't want that much like business logic in your models. Like you want to kind of keep that out separated into your services and stuff. But that's not to say like you can't do that in functions. I just try and keep them more simple wrappers for service calls, I guess.
What determines then what should be part logic within a model and logic in a service or something? Like when you say they shouldn't really do that, who or what determines that?
It's just kind of how you feel about it. I get like eventually you kind of get a good sense for, okay, this model is clearly doing too much stuff. So like let's refactor it and break it down into something smaller, something simpler.
For the purpose of design and clarity.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, just kind of good software architecture more.
All right. And so let's start looking at some models, and maybe we can see some examples of what type of what decisions we're making around those, or we see craft making around those decisions. So I wanted to just quickly walk through. Okay, here we have a twig template, and one thing we might output is a string. That's not a model. I'm going to go through what's not a model here. Here we have another string. This one we're setting as a variable, and it's the same thing, and we're outputting it as a variable. It's not a model.
Are you sure? You should be probably sharing.
I should be sharing my screen.
Yeah, I was asking.
Here we go. I'll share my screen.
I was imagining it, but
right. No, in my head it's beautiful.
All right. Oh, that does it. Well, anyway,
I guess
my whole reference to the docs earlier didn't make any sense either. Here we are on the docs.
I've never seen them. I just file tickets.
All right, so here we have a twig template. We have a string. It's something we output in our template. It's not a model. Here we have another string. We're creating a variable. It's also not a model. We're going to get more complex here, though. Now we're going for an array. Here is a variable that contains a handful of things in it, but again, not a model. And twig gives us one more construct here we call a hash, or a multi-dimensional array, and it's a combination of key value pairs. Again, not a model. But why isn't this a model? So when I'm in my template, I can access entry title, and I'm told that entry is a model and a title is an attribute on that model that I can output. But here I have a hash that I've created in the template manually, and it has a title attribute, and I can output the same title value. Is this a certain type of simple model conceptually, or it's not a model, it's a multidimensional array? And what distinguishes it from the entry model?
It's like asking why is a cat not a dog? I guess like they're just fundamentally like they're both data structures. They both hold data, but one of them we have arbitrarily given this title of model, and a model has when you say it's a model, you're guaranteed to have specific traits and things you can depend on in that model. And for the hash, you're not going to have those same things to depend on. It's a completely separate data structure.
All right. So we can just willy-nilly change this title to be something else in this hash, and there's no enforcement in this hash that there's going to be certain variables that exist. But each time we have an entry model, we know there's going to be a title, and we know it's going to behave a certain way.
Right.
All right.
Well, and as a designer, just trying to make these templates work and make a site look the way I want to, it's tempting to think, I don't care. I like the hash. I can change the name of the title. I can do all this stuff very easily in the template. Why should I have to deal with these models and understand them? But it's cool because they're one of the basic building blocks in craft. So all the stuff that you're talking about, like validation and like all the sort of magic, or lots of thought and careful planning, like that makes all these things work, is available when you use these models, which is really cool. And your templates are less likely to break and do flaky things. And if you want one piece of information here, you can use it in a different spot. So there's a lot of magic to unlock, and it's worth actually understanding what they are from the trying to understand what the models are end of things, I think.
All right. So from here, let's start taking this into our templates now. I've got our Happy Logger site set up, and I've also got a plugin installed called Kint, which is a recently released plugin, but I think it's going to be handy to look at models in this video. Kint's created by Mildly Geeky, and it uses I guess it's a PHP debugging library called Kint. And if we put it in our templates, it kind of outputs a bunch of information about the variables that we have on our page. So we'll be using that in our templates here to take a look at what's there. So let's go over to our entry template here, and I'm just going to kind of pick a place on the page to output stuff. All right, so let's just make sure that's working. And for those of you who care, this is called dump-driven development, and if you want to do things that are smarter than this, you can watch last week's hangout on troubleshooting and debugging errors in PHP, where Brad gives us a great overview of how to start interacting with these models at a more programmatic level. So what am I doing wrong here? Not on the right area of the page. On the bottom or something. Just the top. All right, so here we have our home page variable at the top here. That's what our title said, and Kint allows us to use a statement that kind of lets us dump the variable that we have on our page. So here we're going to dump our multi-dimensional array. It's going to kill our page and give us something that we can look into that with. And it tells us it's an array, it has 2 items in it, and both of those items are strings, and that's what those are. So that's helpful to see what's inside that. So let's now put our entry variable into that and see what we get back. Kint gives us an entry model in our template, and then several tabs to start looking through that entry model. And so all of a sudden, our variable, which was very simple and only had 2 strings in it, has many, many things in it. It's got lots going on. And as far as us on the front end, we don't know or care about a lot of this stuff, perhaps, and it might intimidate us. If you're using Kint, one easy place to start is on the Iterate or Contents tab, and that's the information that's in this model that can be output to the page. So we see, or the variables that we can access in that model. So I'm going to start there because it simplifies the amount of variables on the entry model. And we see there's several variables there, but that some of those variables are actually instances of other models. So this is the cool thing, is that models aren't only models, they can have other models in them.
Not models, those would be just objects.
Okay.
Since they don't, like, technically to be a model, you need to extend the base model class, but the datetime class is just an instance of PHP's datetime object.
Okay.
So there is a distinction there.
So when is an object a model and when is an object not a model?
A model is always an object, but an object is not necessarily a model. Your object has to extend base model. So if you look at EntryModel, it'll extend base model, or it'll extend something that eventually extends base model.
Okay. And what benefits do we get by extending base model that another object doesn't have? You
get all of the traits I was talking about earlier that are specific to models. So attributes and all of the other model-y things, like the datetime class isn't going to have a concept of attributes like models do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right, so here we have date created, and it's more similar to our multi-dimensional array, and it just has a handful of variables that we might be accessing in it. Now, this object can have methods as well, or functions in some cases.
Right. Yeah.
So it still has those same behaviors as models. It just doesn't have a few of the other assumptions.
Right.
All right. So these are the initial things on our entry model. These are kind of the meta attributes of the model that we would see in our associated with the entry model in our docs. But the cool thing about Craft is that we can use custom fields just about everywhere on all of the elements in our interface, or in our system, and what we don't see here in this list of attributes is any of the custom fields that are associated with the entry model. So if we want to see those custom fields, they're actually not associated directly with the entry model. They're associated with a model, and I think I'm right here. I'm getting the term right here, Brad, but correct me if I'm wrong. They're associated with another model that is part of an attribute on the entry model, which is the content model. So if we move over to the content tab here, we'll find a private method referring to our content model. And if we start digging into that, we will find more information on the specific custom fields associated with this element type. So here we have our article body or client logos fields. All right, so in this interaction, this gives us a nice way to start looking at what's inside of a particular model in our entry model. And I think the key two areas you'll want to be familiar with if you're trying to understand what's in your model as far as templating goes on the front end are this content model. That's going to be all of your custom fields. And then if you scroll down a bit, you'll find the attributes array, which is, again, what we saw in that iterator contents tab, all of the top-level attributes that we might have on our entry model.
I don't know if I'm jumping the gun by asking this, but when you're looking at these private variables, typically, basically, when we look at the public iterators in the other tab, those are things that I know I can readily get to from my template. And I see these attributes in a private array and content attributes or chunks of content that I know I can get to. How do I actually get to those things? Because I can't actually type _attributes in a template, right?
Yeah, so what Matt is asking is there's different types of variables and they have different types of access. So some of them are public, some of them are private. Working with Craft, we know we can access the custom fields and the attributes of the entry model, but we don't know why, because it appears that these are in private variables. And if I think if I was to try to access that content variable directly here, I don't think I'm going to get anything. Yeah. It says it does not have a method or closure named content, effectively saying that I can't access that private method directly. So, Brad, how am I able to access the information on this content model in my private field when this is a private variable?
There's public methods that are wrappers for all of these private variable instances. So, like if you were to type entry dot whatever a private attribute is, then there's a public magic method that knows to go look for that private instance and then return it. So there's like a little wrapper for each one of those.
Is there an easy one to look at as an example there, maybe?
Yeah. So go back down to the attributes. So like if you were to do just entry.enabled, then it knows to look at the private attributes array and get the value of the enabled property for that.
So on the class in your code, you have something that says if somebody's looking for enabled, pull it out of the private array for them and give it to them.
Yeah, and I don't remember the exact order, but I think we look at direct attributes first, and then we'll look at the content model to see if maybe you were referring to one of those. Like we go through a series of checks to try and resolve it to what you were looking for. And eventually, if it can't find anything, you'll get that error that got no idea what you're talking about. So throw an error.
So the simplest way to know what's private or public is just look at the craft docs. The variables that are available will be listed there.
Right.
If I'm digging through this model, am I going to find anything that says certain things are private or certain things are publicly accessible, or is it just my common knowledge that the attributes array is stuff that I can access, the content model is stuff that I can access?
Yeah, those are the two big ones. Like those 99% of what you're looking for will be in those two.
Okay. Good question, Matt.
Thank you.
Any others there?
I don't think so. I'm used to using, whenever I can't access something in like a plugin, it's always in a custom field, and I have to first add get content as a method, and then I can get the field by its handle. I don't know if I'm always doing that right.
That's in the context of a plugin, though, right? Through PHP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different behavior. Like you don't. Through a template, you don't have to do entry.getContent. Whatever.
So if we were in our, what we're saying here is if we were over in our entries controller, for example, I always just use the save entry method because I know there's an entry model there to play with if I want. Oh, I was killing it here. So Kint actually has an interactive debugger for PHP as well, so we could dump this same thing if we were on the back end on one of our entries and I save it to trigger that save entry method. We'll see we can have this same interface in Kint that allows us to kind of dig around our models and learn a little bit more about them if we want. But again, that's dump-driven development, and Brad will tell you why that's not the best way in the last straight-up hangout.
I'm actually disappointed you're not using Xdebug for this.
You know, I find these dumps are easier to explain I feel like from a front-end developer perspective, it's easier to explain when you just kill a script at a single point in time.
Yeah, you're probably right. Plus, debugging compiled twig templates is no fun.
Yeah. And so what Matt was saying here is that from our entry model, we can get content, which is a method that is accessing that content model on the front side and that we were just looking at. And you can start accessing variables on that content model there.
That helped me understand a lot by writing plugins I would just break in various ways. That some things can be accessed directly, like the ID or that I think the title of an entry. And then some things, like anything stored in a custom field, would have to come through an instance of the content model like that. And things kind of made a lot more sense after that. That's usually how I do things, though, is what's the word? Not dump-driven development as much as just breaking things over and over until they stop being broken.
Destructive-driven development. Yeah, it's the best way to learn. Just go start commenting out code and seeing what stops working when you do. See if you can predict what you're commenting out breaks what you think it's breaking.
Well, and then the structure of a plugin, too, first was hugely annoying because it's just so much more cumbersome to create like a stupid little plugin to fill a quick need, but then it's so clean, and it's like a mini instance of your craft or something in each plugin, and it's just it's very enlightening if you spend the time banging your head against the wall to try and put together a plugin and don't have vast experience with EA or even I don't know, clean object-oriented development.
Great. Anybody viewing right now, if you have any questions, feel free to post them to the Hangout, and we'll try to get them worked in here. I'll be monitoring that on and off here, so feel free to post something if you have a question. All right, so I guess just kind of more of the same. So we can access these attributes. Brad clarified that some of these attributes might be other objects, some of them might be other models. I'm just going to grab another one on this entry model. We can get author, and we'll see when we get author, we don't just get back the title of our author, we actually get back a user model. And the same is true here. User is an element type. So as we start looking through this information, we find the similar attributes section that we can see here. And is there, I didn't see content model, but I expect it's here somewhere. Here it is, content. Oh, and I don't have any custom fields on the content for this install, so we're not seeing anything there. All right. So yeah, that's the main thing I wanted to kind of tour there is how we can kind of run into the same models as we see relationships and other things within those models. Now, I don't have too much more here. I guess the last thing I wanted to kind of turn attention to is, where do we, if we want to explore this stuff more, Where does it exist in the code and in our app folder or in any plugin? We can find a folder called models and and start exploring what we're seeing out here when we're killing the script. We can go to our user model and start to explore. Okay, what the user model is a class. It is extending the base element class. It has certain attributes and methods. It has a lot of different things that we can learn about it if we just want to look at it directly. Now, maybe one thing worth clarifying about models, if we're kind of thinking about them a little more programmatically now, is the Pixel and Tonic or the Craft docs kind of say that when we use models, there are these transporters between controllers and services and between templates and services. So we submit data from a form. We associate that data with a model, which allows us to validate it and ensure that it's consistent and all the benefits we get from models. And then we hand off that data to a service which performs additional business logic. Likewise, if we're loading a template, is it fair to say templates are kind of the controller, or variables are kind of the controllers of the templates? I guess it should be variable.
Yeah, so the theory there is that so what you expose to a template should basically be coming from these variable classes we have. Now this is changed somewhat in Craft 3, so specifically talking about Craft 2 here. But essentially these variables are just wrappers for calls to the service. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 I mean the idea behind this is like I know this is about models, but you don't necessarily want to expose records which have the ability to change database states, update, insert into the database. You don't want to expose those to the template level, because then you can have a template that can make database changes, and that can get dangerous. Mm-hmm. So the theory is you wrap those in variables so you can control exactly what gets exposed to the template.
Great. And so where the records start coming in is over here after the services, maybe the services turn the model into a record, and then the record does something to the database. Is that a fair?
Right. And the service, the record, the step between service and database is optional. You don't have, a service doesn't have to use an active record. It can manipulate the database directly if it wants, which we do all the time. Basically, records get used for kind of more simple database operations, and in places where speed is not critical, just because there is some overhead associated with records as well as models. And if it's in a speed-critical path, you don't want all that extra overhead. So.
Yeah, and to emphasize that, we can look maybe at the user model or the entry model that when we dump our model here in the database, we get 1,000 methods and variables, and if we only need the title field back, we still get all of this other stuff with it. And when we were looking at our simple array hash with the title attribute, when we dumped that on the page, we saw that it really only contained 2 strings as the amount of data that it was holding. Where these models, when we have a list of 100 users or 100 entries, and we're just outputting their name, we're still getting back all of this additional information that we can interact with.
Right, and one of the big changes we made in Craft 3 was improving the performance of these models. So if you're dealing with 50,000 of them at a time, you can find out on Craft 2 that consumes way too much memory, but in Craft 3 it's orders of magnitude faster. So
Right.
we learned a few things.
Wonderful.
So I'm thinking about this in the context of plugin development, but I assume conceptually it's the same. The detriment of having a record, if I'm understanding you right, Brad, is performance. But what's the benefit that you get if you should choose to use a record instead of interacting with the model directly?
It's wait, so choose to use a record versus manipulating the database directly?
Right. What benefit do you get? Like you said, sometimes you'll not use records when it's a performance issue, but what benefit do you get when you do choose to use them as a design decision?
Oh, they're simple. They're like it's like fast food. Like if you need to quickly do something with the database, you can like insert a new record. It's just a matter of spinning up a new instance of that active record class and calling save on it. Versus it's a little bit more typing to go, to like use the query builder to build out your entire query and
so it's a convenient interface.
Yeah, that's basically it. And then I guess there's other things like you can set up the relationships between records and on the back end between tables through their foreign key constraints. So you can do things like entry dot relationships or something like that, and get all of and on the back end that's querying the relationships table. So like it's a more programmatic way to access that data, I guess.
Now, a record is actually a subclass of a model.
Right, except the big difference is it has the ability to query and update the database. I mean, it's like a model with database baggage attached to it.
And you'll notice as you go through the models and records in the code base that frequently they look almost exactly the same. And the key distinction is that one of them can perform actions on the database and the other can't. And the reason we're using models throughout most of the exchange of information is because we don't want to accidentally be creating database interactions or changing data when we don't specifically know we're doing it.
Yeah, and another distinction is that there's not necessarily, like, we have a user record and a user model, and so I've seen people ask before, oh, why do you have two? You're just duplicating, the attributes and all this stuff. But aside from the database access, another distinction is there's not necessarily a one-to-one mapping between a model and a record. You could have a model that's mapping 10 different records if you want, just pulling specific attributes from each one.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
that's helpful. And active record, which is where the record comes from, if I'm understanding right, is something that spans or is available in a lot of different frameworks, right? Like it came from Rails,
yeah,
or something.
Well, I think it was even before Rails. It's a design pattern. It's a software design pattern, but I'm not sure if Rails is the first one that used it. Some people love it and some people hate it. I've heard it described as the Vietnam of database access patterns. So
okay. I'll have to Google that.
Yeah, it's good to note with records that they're kind of like models. If you just Google record, you're going to get a variety of disambiguation to work with. But Googling active record or active record gets you more specific results. Record is just a shorthand for that longer reference. And so we have one question, and I guess if you'd like to clarify this EIP 56, the question is, it's basically creating class variable encapsulation, correct?
Yeah, I think he's referring to the variable wrappers for the templates there. Yeah, it's you're encapsulating all the service calls in those variable classes. So
All right, and then on the topic of classes, what is the relationship between a model and a class?
So, okay, this is kind of getting into programming theory, I guess. But so a class is like if you open up the EntryModel code.
Over.
Right. Yeah. So go up to the top of that where the class is defined.
Here.
Yeah, or actually in PHP Storm or Sublime, whatever you've got there. Yeah. So at the very top of this, it's going to say, you know, class, EntryModel, extends, whatever. Okay, so a class is like a template for an object. So when you do, you know, in your code, you know, new entries controller, you're taking that template and you're taking that template class template and creating an instance of an object from it. So a model also has a class template. So like you could open up UserModel, EntryModel, any of those. Right. So here's the class for it, and when we do new EntryModel, we've got like a new instance of it. It's now an object. So, yeah, I don't know.
Putting you on the spot for all these definitions. I know they're.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, I don't know. It's like comparing apples and oranges when you say what's the difference between a model and a class. Well, a class is what defines the model. And then when you instantiate it, you've got the model.
Got it.
It's like comparing apples and oranges, but to really be thorough about it, you have to go down to what is matter, and then start from there and work your way up, I think.
Yeah, maybe. It's like comparing.
It's like
yeah, go ahead.
Everything's an object, right?
Right.
And so I think that's the thing that gets really interesting about this is the object is like the core chunk of matter, at least as far as PHP in this. Stop me, Brad, when I'm not making sense because I'm homeschooled in my programming understanding. But everything is an object, and those are like the basic units of matter. And then this framework, all this stuff is built on the idea that an object is a very, very simple thing, but that can be extended, and objects can be descended from other objects. And so there's this whole evolution of ideas, and the Yi framework is one part of that, which includes these things like models and controllers and views and services and all kinds of stuff. Craft is built on top of that, and then Craft has its classes that extend other classes, and it's kind of a really, really neat evolution of things. So for any one class that you could be looking at, it's inheriting things from other classes way back in the evolution chain. And different classes are evolved to do different specific kinds of things. You might want a horse and a fish, and I don't know where I was going to go with that. But anyway, you get to the apple and the orange, but they have a lot of commonalities through this class system. And everything is based off of the very exciting object, I think.
Yeah.
So there's a relationship between all this stuff that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can read. There's tons and tons of good books on object-oriented programming, and the theory and the thinking behind it. So if you're interested in that, then that's what you'd want to look for. But I mean, there's there's functional programming which doesn't carry these same concepts, and procedural programming, which for a long time PHP was just a procedural language. I think it's only been with PHP 5 where they started adding these object-oriented concepts. So.
So if I'm getting used to this, and if I want to know Craft really well, would it benefit me to look into object-oriented programming?
Sure, I would tell you that whether you wanted to get into Craft or not. So, but yes, we're using an object-oriented approach to use an object-oriented framework. Craft's an object-oriented application on top of that. So yeah, it's good to know these concepts.
All right. And EIP56 shares class is programmatic code to achieve an effect. An object is an instance of the class.
Yeah.
All right, so if there's any more questions, please send them through. That's the extent of the topics I kind of had on my list to go through. Oh, and we got 2 questions. Hold on. Everything. Okay, I think it's just information. Everything, especially frameworks, originate from an object.
Yeah, I think he's just expanding on
Yeah.
the object-oriented fundamentals.
Great. Thanks, CIP. I'll let people read this in the sidebar of the Hangout. All right. All right. With that said, yeah. So hopefully, there's some tidbits in there for people trying to understand models a little bit better. And I feel this concept always gets very programmatic, and it's very hard to just talk about it from the front-end developer perspective. And I think this is what the Craft docs is trying to do by calling the models variables and just listing the attributes that you can access with them. It's really all you need to know on the front end is that the data will be consistent where you're interacting with it, and it has certain data available that you can access, and understanding these deeper parts becomes more helpful as you get into the programmatic side of things. But in your template, understanding the consistency element and some key things like what is a variable and what is an array can get you pretty far as what you need to know about models. All right. We'll wrap things up then.
All right.
Thank you for joining us at the latest Straight Up Hangout. It's a weekly event presented by Barrel Strength Design and Pixel and Tonic. And this coming week, we'll be looking at tools for plugin development. Andrew Welch and Lindsay DiLoretto will be joining us, and we'll be taking a look at pluginfactory.io and the business logic plugin. So we'll see what they have to offer as we start developing plugins for Craft. To the day.